Hi, in this video I'm going to talk about how to use the application to create procedure sorghum. So on the desktop I have two folders. The SorghumFactory, this is where I place the application, and the lab scene, and later we'll create the project under this folder. And I already have some assets inside this folder, and later on I will tell you how to use these assets to help you create the procedural sorghum. So let's get started. Uh, okay, so let's start the application. And here you can create or load new project. If you want to create a new project, I would suggest you create an empty folder anywhere on your computer and use that folder as your project folder. So now I'm going to just create a new folder, and let's call it sample 1, and double click here. So we are inside this empty folder, and here we'll create a new project. Let's call it the sample project. Okay. Alright, so now we are in the project, and as you can see, there's nothing inside the scene. But the first thing you need to do is navigate to this project panel, and here we have this very simple project dialog. Since we create the project under empty folder, there's nothing inside the project folder. So what we're going to do next is to create a new asset called the sorghum state generator, this one. Okay, so this asset contains the parameter for the procedure sorghum. Okay, let's maximize the window for now. And yeah, so now we have the asset. The next thing you want to do is to double click on this asset. Okay, so now we have this new new panel called the asset inspector showing up on the right side of my screen. And in the asset inspector, basically it contains the settings for this asset. In this scenario, we have all the settings for the procedural parameters. So now all your tuning happens right here. But before we set up the parameters, the first thing we want to do is to instantiate a sorghum inside the scene that is linked with the new asset we just created. So just click on this small blue button, Instantiate. Okay, so now in the scene we have a sorghum that is created on the default settings of this sorghum state generator. And if you navigate to the left side of the screen, there is a panel called the Entity Explorer. And you may notice we have a new entity called the sorghum showing up under the scene hierarchy. So if you double click on this sorghum, and on the right side of my screen, we have some new stuff under the Entity Inspector panel. So the sorghum in the scene is represented by this entity, and an entity can have many private components. For example, for the main camera entity, we have the camera private component. So this camera provides the basic rendering for the scene. And for the sorghum entity, we have different kinds of private components like the spline, sorghum data, and the mesh renderer. So in this case, we only focus on the sorghum data. So these private component link this entity with the sorghum state generator asset. Okay, so let's go back to the asset inspector. Now let's say if we want to have a panicle on this sorghum, what you need to do is to check on this checkbox, panicle. Okay, so now we have a very small panicle on the plant. So what if I want to make the panicle like taller and on like far above the top leaf? The first thing I want to do is navigate to the stem settings in the asset inspector for the sorghum state generator and expand the lens settings. So for most parameters, when you like hover your mouse above these settings, there's a small tip a small tip will show up, like explaining what the settings is for. So in this case, when I navigate to the length, it tells me like this part is for me to control the length of the stem, and it also tells me that if I want to have a stem that sticks far above the top leaf, I may play with the ending point in the leaf settings. So now let's just make the stem longer in this case. So what I need to do is to make the mean value or the average of the length longer. So now, as you can see, the leaf is taller than before. The advantage of instantiating the sorghum before you tuning the parameters is that you can preview the changes immediately when you change the parameter itself. So the next thing is like I don't want to have this leaf far above the pinnacle, so I navigate to the ending point of the under the leaf settings here, and I can change the percentage of the point where the top leaf is located along the stem, something like this. See? And I can also change the starting point, which it controls the point where the bottom leaf is located, something like this. Okay. And what if I want to have like more leaves? I can adjust the number of leaves in this case. Okay, so uh, part one of the most important part in the procedural sorghum is that you are allowed to set up the variance of each parameter. So in this case, you can see that for each parameters, we always have a settings to control the deviation or the variance of the certain parameter. And let's say if I want to have like more procedural sorghums with a different stem length, I can change the deviation of the length in the stem settings. So yeah, so in this case, you can see that the length of this particular sorghum becomes longer. Like, what if you want to actually observe the effect of like changing that deviation? Uh, what you need to do is to change the seed of the sorghum. So to do that, go back to the left side of the screen, double click the sorghum under the Entity Explorer, and on the right side of the screen, you find the private component, the sorghum data. Okay, and here we have this small setting that will help you set up the seed for the sorghum. So currently we have the seed which the default value is 0. You can just hold your left button and drag, so the seed value will change. And you can see the sorghum in the scene is constantly changing because I'm changing the seed of this sorghum. So with the same seed, the sorghum will always be the same one, like this one. With different seed, the sorghum will be different according to the different variance settings. Okay, so I'm not going to prepare you a documentation after this because instead I provided the tip for each settings. So if you want to see what this setting is for, you need to expand the settings, like the number of leaves. And after you expand the settings, and you hover your mouse above this section, and the tip will show up. Okay, so that's basically it. And one more thing is that you can also control the details of the leaf or the stem. For example, if I want to make the center of the stem fatter, I can I can adjust the width along the stem. So here we have this curve editor. Inside the curve editor, you can adjust the curve by dragging this little square on the screen. And if you want to add more points on the curve, you just double click anywhere under this grid, something like this. Okay, so you can also move the point by like click and hold this center square, something like this. So to set the initial value or the end value, there's also a drag bar below this curve editor. Something you can do is like this. You can adjust the starting value and the end value. So uh, if I want to create a stem that is fatter at the middle and the center, at the start and the end, I can have a very small value on both sides of the curve and have a very large value at the center of the curve. So as you can see, the stem of this sorghum is like it's fatter at the middle and the center on both ends. Okay, and there's a little introduction text, and if you want to hide it, you can just unclick this checkbox here. Okay. Uh, and for the leaf settings, when you open up the any one of them, you'll see that you can actually adjust uh, values for different leaves. So in this case, if I want to have a longer leaf for like for the center leaves and the shorter leaves for the top one and the bottom one, what you want to do is to expand the lens settings. And here we also have a curve editor. So this curve editor is not for you to control the lens along the stem. That one is under the leaf details. So this one is for you to control the lens across different leaves. So now we have this rather flat curves. What I can do is I can create a new point, and now you can see that we have a very long leaves at the center of the plant, and the rather shorter leaves for the top leaf and the bottom leaf. See? And to remove a point on the curve, you double click on the square at the center, something like this. And so sometimes the changes is not applied immediately on the screen. You need to like quickly change some of the value here to apply the changes you made when you remove a point on the curve. So yeah, after you think you're satisfied with the parameter, always make sure that you click the save button here to save the asset. Okay, so when you make changes to the asset, uh, the there's a small text here that warns you that the change is not saved. So this is sort of the reminder to help you remember that you need to save this asset. Okay, so after you save the asset, you can just quit the application or do something else. Okay, so that's basically the introduction for you to adjust the parameter for the procedure sorghum. So now let's close the application and restart it. And this time we're going to make sure that the stem is the fits the right size inside the laboratory, and this time we will create, or no, we will load a new project my desktop. Let's call the lab scene. I will send you this project later. Okay, so here we'll create a new project called, like, let's call it sample 2, right? Yeah. Okay, so here we have, again, we have this new project. However, under the project panel, you see that we already have some assets pre-stored under this folder. So here we have two, like two preset parameters which I use to create the virtual data set for uh, some uh, some other students. And here you can try to instantiate both of them to see what they are look like. Okay, so one of it is smaller. So this one, the skeleton, is the one I use to create the images that I try to replicate the image taken from the phenotyping facility that is like for Matthew, and for this one, the young, the predator that's named Young. This one is for replicating the sorghum that is actually planted in the field in Arizona, so they can. So I use it to create the point cloud, so they can train and do something else. Anyway, so yeah, now we have this two stuff, and we also have this asset called the lab. So this is a prefab, and it contains the laboratory geometry. So what you can do is you can just uh, click on this asset, hold your left mouse, and drag it into the scene. Okay, let me do this again. Like click and drag. So yeah, so that gives you a virtual like phenotyping facility, and the size is adjusted according to the actual laboratory size. So you can use this prefab to make sure that the size of the sorghum, whether you're creating a mature sorghum or young sorghum, and you want to make sure that the sorghum fits inside this lab prefab. So I will not need to readjust the size of the mature sorghum you provided. Uh, and that will save us like tons of time to do it. Okay, so that's basically the end of this video. If you have any questions, please just send me an email, and I will respond. I will respond them like as soon as possible. Okay, thank you.